just give it a second and we'll let everyone start to get a chance to come in before we get started. All right. So I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today and welcome to the Wyoming Community Program Navigator Program webinar. We're happy that you've joined us. My name is Mandy Bailey and I'm the Advising and Education Director for the Wyoming Community Navigator Program. I'm going to be your facilitator today, working behind the scenes and trying to answer any questions or help with any technical difficulties that may arise. So the Wyoming Community Navigator Program is funded through the U.S. Small Business Administration and utilizes the Wyoming Entrepreneurial Support Network to reduce barriers that all small businesses often face, including those owned by groups such as veteran, women, and those from rural communities and communities of color. The Wyoming Community Navigator Program uses a hub and spoke model to pursue its goals. Through their collective efforts, the hub and spoke provide training, access to capital, and access to other resources to help business owners build resiliency and ultimately be the driving force behind Wyoming's economic recovery. Today, we are going to welcome Bridget Manley and Daniel Patterson for collecting payment in person and online. Just a brief background, Bridget Manley is an e-learning specialist with a passion for helping others learn and become effective agents in their careers and their communities. She co-founded Ascendant Design and Training with her husband, Daniel Patterson, in July of 2020. And before that, she was a curriculum manager for a Denver-based startup company where she developed compliance and manufacturing training for the state legal cannabis industry. And Daniel is a software systems developer with over 30 years of multidisciplinary experience in software, electronic, and mechanical design. He's been involved in several different industries, including logistics, gaming, music, and heavy equipment, just to name a few. So without further ado, we are going to hear from Bridget and Daniel today.
Okay, well, thank you, Mandy. I appreciate that. And we're always happy to be here with the Community Navigator Program. And today we're going to tell you a little bit about what we have learned about collecting payments in person and online. Our hope today is that you come away with this session with just a little bit more information about what type of payment collection system would be best for you, whether it's an online model or an in-person model or a combination of both. So you can accept payments from your customers, regardless of whether you provide services or products. You can collect those payments in an easy, headache-free way. So just a little bit more about us. I'm Bridget Manley. As mentioned before, I'm co-founder of Ascendant Design and Training with Daniel Patterson. And in our business, I wear a lot of hats, as probably most of you do. I'm kind of head of services, and I do a lot of custom e-learning development for companies, mainly to help them help their employees do their jobs better. And Daniel, in addition to his very extensive background in software, he also has a background in basically information technology for the banking sector. So he has a lot of really good background knowledge in terms of different payment systems and how payment is collected. So today I'll be your guide through the topic today, but Daniel will be with us today too to answer any specific questions that you might have. So let's talk a little bit about what we'll do today in our session. In this interactive webinar today, we'll start off by exploring the most common payment forms that you'll probably see your customers using, and look at when those payment forms might be more common depending on where you're doing business. And that'll help us kind of look at a comparison of collecting payment in person versus online. And then we'll look at some of the tools and best practices for both of those models, so you can identify what you need to do in order to be able to collect those payments, again, in person or online. At the end of the session, we'll give you some questions that you can think about to help you identify which method or combination of both would be best for your business and your customers. So we're not here today exactly to tell you what you should do, but we're here to give you some clarifying questions that will help you think through the specifics of your particular business and identify how you might want to structure your own payment collection system. So throughout the session today, you are more than welcome to jump into the chat, to ask questions, to share thoughts, to respond to other people's questions and thoughts. We really encourage you to participate actively today. We'd like this to kind of be more than a conversation rather than us just lecturing you for 45 minutes. As we go, I'll try to pause throughout to see if there are questions. During those times, you're free to drop your question in the chat or feel free to unmute your microphone if you'd like, and just ask your question out loud. We just ask that when you're not speaking to go ahead and leave your microphone on mute so we don't have any background noise. So with that today, we're going to start with a question. If you've been with us on webinars before, we like to start with the question just to kind of understand a little bit more about you and the kind of business you own. And for this webinar, we'd also like to know where you primarily do your business with customers. And this will become more relevant just in a few minutes, and we'll show you why that matters. But for right now, feel free to jump into the chat and drop in, again, what type of business you own or hope to own if you haven't launched one already. And where do you primarily do business with your customers right now? So I'll give you some time to think about that, to respond to that question. I'll keep going and kind of introduce us to the topic, but in a few minutes, we'll return to that question and we'll see how it's relevant for the topic today. So while you're thinking and while you're responding to that, let's just, briefly take a look at why payment collection matters. As you're probably aware, timely payment collections are really important to having a healthy business. And the emphasis here is on timely. Here's why. The main thing is that timely payment collection ensures that your business has a healthy cash flow, which in turn ensures that you can pay your vendors on time and maintain good relationships with the people who support your business. They can also help increase customer loyalty simply because you're able to provide services and products in a timely manner. They're able to pay for those products in a very straightforward way. They know exactly what they're paying for, and they receive those products and services without much hassle. So it's a great way to build trust with your customers or your clients. And finally, a good payment collection system is really important to preventing payment disputes and potential legal issues. Now, of course, as business owners, we want to avoid these kinds of disputes or legal issues whenever we can. So having a good system in place will help you do that. So now that we kind of know why it's important, let's think a little bit about how do you choose which payment system or setup is best. Do you want to collect payment in person? Do you want to do it online? Or is it a combination of both? Well, a lot of that comes back to how and where you do business with your customers. So if you're primarily doing on-site customer service, for instance, as a construction company or something similar, you're probably working at somebody else's home or workplace. In that kind of instance, it would probably be better if you had the ability to collect payment immediately, right on your phone, right there when you're actually doing business with the customer. You might also have a system or a business model where you do a lot of sales at public gatherings. Maybe you sell, for example, like homemade soaps, for instance, at farmers markets or pop-up markets or conventions and things like that. This is another instance where having the ability to do in-person transactions, but very quickly in a mobile manner could be really helpful. Now, if you're in a retail shop or a restaurant, you've got one place where you're doing almost all of your transactions and it's in your own shop. So that's pretty straightforward. You're probably doing a lot of transactions in person in one place. You might be doing work in an office, maybe yours or somebody else's. And as is more common right now, you might have a completely online business where all of your transactions are happening online versus in person. So let's jump to the chat. I'm going to open that up and we'll just see what we have so far in terms of where you're doing business right now. Okay, so let's see. Anne says she's doing coaching, mostly via Zoom. Okay, cool. Lauren, clothing alterations out of your home. Hey, that's cool. Nice. Allison, we are a public library in Virginia. Wow. And take payments for fines and services and fees. Okay. Excellent. I imagine that maybe some of that might be in person and some of it might be online. Feel free to correct me on that, but that's just my experience in libraries. That would kind of make sense. Let's see, Maria, nonprofit used bookstore. That's pretty cool. Diana's in publishing, nonprofit organization. Josie, seamstress and design. Nancy, own a vineyard and winery. Customers come to our facility, so you're doing a lot of in-person payment collection. Braden, fence contractor on client property. Okay, so that's an example when, again, you're doing a lot of the work on site. Rebecca, business consulting. Excellent. Yeah, and then Allison just says we take in-person and online. Okay. And then Kelly, photography and writing. Okay, cool. So we've got a large spectrum of different business models today, everything from services to products and everything in between. Excellent. Okay. So if you have questions specifically today to how your particular business runs and the best way to collect payment for your business, feel free to drop those into the chat and we'll get to them either during breaks in the session or at the end. So excellent. Okay, so now that we've talked about where you do business and why that matters, let's take a quick look at some of the most common payment forms you'll probably see your customers using. Cash, of course, is pretty straightforward. You can pretty much only use that for in-person transactions. So if you're doing a lot of work, for instance, again, at like farmers markets, you might see some cash as well as maybe some credit card transactions. Checks, not as widely used as they used to be, but some people still use them. There are tools called e-checks, and this allows financial providers to allow customers to accept online checks that, or allow you to collect payment through online checks that draw directly from the customer's account. So it almost kind of works like a debit card at that point. Debit and credit cards are probably the most common form of payment right now. They're really versatile. You can use them in person or online. It's important to keep in mind that credit card processors often come with a fee, and this is usually a percentage of each transaction as well as an additional service charge, like a monthly service charge. But the upside is that credit and debit processors, specifically for major debit and credit cards, are they're usually very reliable and secure. So you can take those payments and be confident that your customers' financial data won't be breached. And then finally, we have electronic wallets, and that's kind of a big umbrella term for many different types of payment, everything from PayPal, Venmo, Zelle, some of the other ones that you've heard about. These are basically just ways that you can either take money from your banking account or have people send money to you digitally, and then you can use that to pay for goods and services. An important thing to keep in mind is that, one, they're able to be used either in person or online, so they're pretty versatile, but they're not widely adopted yet. And that's because a lot of these electronic wallets don't have any standardized kind of ways of doing business in place yet. So people have been a little bit slow to adopt them. You also want to keep in mind that these apps typically charge a fee as well, anywhere from 2% to 12% of the transaction. And if you're doing business primarily through PayPal, which is probably the most popularly used electronic wallet, keep in mind that if your customers aren't PayPal members and you send them a charge, they'll pay a certain percentage on the transaction as well, essentially making your product or service more expensive for them. So keep that in mind if you are doing a lot of either services or even donations through PayPal. Okay. And then, of course, there are many other different types of payment you can accept, everything from money orders to cashier's checks to cryptocurrency, right? There's a lot of different ways to pay for stuff, but these four are probably the most common ones that you'll see.
Bridget?
Okay. Yeah.
I would like to address a couple of questions that came up about this particular section. Allison is asking, we would like to be able to take credit and debit in person, and maybe if we do something offsite versus only cash check or sending the patron to our website to use the online payment tied to the online, or sorry, online payment tied to their library account. So Square or something like that. And she would like to know about the security of that and whether they need to set up a separate secure wireless network for those types of transactions, et cetera, or whether it could be run over their public Wi-Fi. And first, as far as the public Wi-Fi particular aspect of it, you may want to talk a little bit more to some IT techs in your area. But typically for any kind of transaction that needs to have the most security possible, companies or organizations will typically run like two different modes of their network. They'll have like a public version of the Wi-Fi, for example, that's available to all of their patrons and guests and stuff like that for just open use at any time. And then a separate like login that would be like a secure version of that same network. And so you probably do need to make sure that you have at least two separate modes, like a secure mode and an open mode to your public library network. But then secondly, once you do have that particular secure login for your lobby and stuff like that, you know, like the front desk computers and stuff like that, you actually can usually set something like Square up right on your front desk computer, and it will run transactions over a secure internet connection through there. So that's kind of how I would recommend going ahead with that, is just making sure that you generally that your staff uses a secure version of your network, and your patrons use an open version of your network, and then you can do all of those different services. So then Anne is asking, where does Square fit into that list? And in regard to this particular slide, Square would be a provider that you know, basically would provide you with the service for providing all of these different payment forms as a service to you, basically handling all of the different modes of payment. I'm not sure if they would handle receiving a check or not, but you know, many of the financial providers actually will receive checks for you. And, you know, like all of the deposits to the bank and all of that different stuff. And then you would pay them a monthly fee for handling those activities for you.
Yeah, excellent. Excellent.
Okay.
Thank you, Dan.
And then Allison replies, yes, that's how ours is set. Our public has a password, but the staff Wi-Fi is linked to a device that our IT sets up, that's great, because that assures you that you have that much extra security. And if you start running credit card transactions, none of your public guests are going to be eavesdropping on any of that stuff. So yeah, and a staff computer with Square, as long as it's on that secure network, would be pretty secure. You can go one step more secure than that by making sure it's on an Ethernet connection. It doesn't even go to the Wi-Fi at all, but as long as it's a secure Wi-Fi that no public members could get into, then you would just be fine. Yeah, and so she clarified that her staff computer also would be on the Ethernet. So yeah, that just keeps it away from prying eyes, so that when you do use a service like Square or any of those types of services, that you can remain as secure as possible. So,
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you.
Sorry for the interruption there.
No, that's fine. That's fine. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. And yeah, like, thank you for the questions. That's great. I mean, again, we want to make this more of a discussion and make sure that we're kind of addressing the questions you have. So thank you for asking that. And we'll definitely go into more, I'm like in just a few minutes, more about Square and more about security. So yeah, we'll go into more detail in just a few minutes. So now we've talked about payment forms. We're going to look at accepting payment in person and online, and we'll compare them, looking at the advantages, the tools you'll need to do that, and also some best practices. We'll start with accepting payment in person. One of the biggest advantages of this particular model is that you get to build relationships with your clients or customers as you're taking their payment. So it kind of helps foster that personal interaction that you can't get as much online. It also ensures that you get immediate payment, which again helps your cash flow and also reduces the risks of payment disputes. There's an added level of security simply because payments can be verified and processed on the spot, which helps reduce the risk of fraud and prevent processing errors. There's also a greater level of flexibility with collecting payment online, simply because you can accept more kinds of payment. You can take cash, you can take all the different types of digital wallets. And so that's great if you're dealing with, say like a larger customer base, or maybe some people aren't as comfortable paying online and they just want to pay with cash or with a credit card or with a check. Okay, so let's look at some of the tools you'll need to collect payment in person. And you're probably familiar with most of these, honestly. The first one would be a payment terminal. This could be like a credit card reader, a point of sale or POS system. Just anything that you can use to capture cash and checks, as well as process debit or credit card payments. Of course, you'll need a cash register and a receipt printer. In just a moment, we'll talk about the importance of making sure that you provide a receipt for every kind of transaction, regardless of where it's done. But you just want to make sure that you have the capability to create and keep a copy of those receipts for yourself. You might want to look at getting some sort of mobile payment device, such as Square, that can plug into, say, like a mobile phone or a tablet or something, and you can actually swipe cards and take payments on the go. This is really helpful if you do a lot of business outside of a centralized location. So again, if you're visiting somebody's job site, or if you're building fences and you just want to collect payment from them wherever they're at, this would be a really good option to have. If you are taking cash, you want to make sure that you have some sort of counterfeit detection device. This can be something as simple as a counterfeit detection pen, where you mark the bill to see if it changes color. It can be a UV lamp. There are multiple different ways that you can check for counterfeit bills, but no matter which one you choose, you want to make sure that you're verifying those bills for authenticity. If you do a lot of business in cash, it's a good idea to invest in a bill counter. This will save you time, and it'll also ensure that your counts are accurate, and that prevents counting errors for you down the road. And whenever possible, it's a good idea to have security cameras in place whenever you are doing transactions in person. This just protects your safety. It also helps deter theft, and it provides evidence of the transaction in case of a dispute. Now, of course, this isn't always possible, especially if you're out, basically doing business at somebody else's location. But whenever it is possible, you want to include that into your setup as well. So let's talk about some best practices. The first one is to simply be very clear and set clear payment expectations. Make sure that your customers understand your payment policies, including payment due dates, accepted payment methods, and any late payment fees that might apply. Always provide receipts, either in print or via email. We have noticed that with Square and some of these other mobile processors, they give you the option to email a receipt to your customer, which is really convenient. It's easy to get on the go, and it's convenient for you as a provider. But no matter how you provide them, make sure that you do have receipts to provide a record of the transaction, both for yourself and for the customer. as we've mentioned before, you always want to make sure that your payment processing is secure. So again, you want to use those appropriate security measures, like making sure you're on a secure network, using Ethernet when you have the capability to do so. Also make sure that you're using things like encryption and password protection. And this ensures that the payment data is protected. If you hire staff and they're going to be accepting payment as well, make sure you train them on any point of sale system that you have, and make sure that they also know how to identify counterfeit bills and handle any payment disputes that might come up. As always, no matter what type of payment you're collecting, you always want to keep very accurate records. Specifically, you want to keep records of the amount paid, the date and time of the transaction, the payment method, and any notes or related comments that might be valid. If you have a point of sale service, a lot of this will probably be captured for you automatically, but you just want to make sure that this actually is recorded for each and every transaction that you have. You also want to be able to make sure that you're following up on late payments in a friendly, professional manner. And this could just be something as simple like, hey, payment is due tomorrow. Please, please let us know, please send payment promptly, or something along those lines. And this will help prevent any misunderstandings or disputes. Okay, let's pause before we go into taking payments online. We'll go ahead and pause and check the chat, because it looks like there are a few more questions in there, perhaps. Okay. Okay, so Dan, Allison has a question that might be kind of more in your field. She asks, when you pay on Square at the farmer's market, which is public Wi-Fi, are you saying that may not be as secure?
Yeah, I typed in an answer to that, but
Okay.
yeah, basically public Wi-Fi is somewhat less secure than a password protected Wi-Fi with encryption. However, there are multiple levels of security. For example, you just covered on the last slide, you have a secure connection on your browser. And so always make sure that, especially with working with a payment processor of any kind, that that little lock icon is turned on, that you have a secure connection going in your browser. And even if somebody can intercept your data packets at that point, those will all be encrypted. The main thing is that whenever possible, you don't want anybody to receive your data at all, even if it is encrypted. So that's why I always try to start with the highest security possible and then work my way down according to whatever's available in that context. But then additionally, something that we're not going to cover here today at all would be that, especially if you want to remain safe and you're in a type of public situation, like a type of public gathering or something like that, you may want to look into subscribing to a virtual private network company or VPN. And even if somebody sees your packets going by, every single thing will be encrypted, even things that you don't consider to be secure. Basically every single packet will be secure at that point. So
Okay, perfect, excellent. And then Lauren asks, do you have record keeping systems that you suggest if you don't have a POS system or terminal?
okay, I have to think about that for a second. Yeah, any kind of popular accounting software, I would say. There's a free one called Newcash, GNUCASH, that we frequently use. There's also QuickBooks and Quicken. If you have just a small personal business, Quicken can often do a lot of your accounting for you. But QuickBooks would be definitely used in the case where you have serious customer base, attention that you need to put forth. So Yeah, those would be just a few things that you can use just to manually handle your accounting side. But then if oh, I'm sorry, I actually kind of didn't answer that question with the right approach at all. But so like oh yeah, record keeping systems. Okay. So but then as far as you do have possible payment processor company services available too, if you're not going to directly use a POS system or terminal. For example, with Wix, the website host, or GoDaddy, the website host, or Shopify, all of those actually have payment collection systems built right in, and they will keep track of your orders and keep track of what's still outstanding. They will receive payment for your orders. Those are going to be online orders only. But once again, they do also offer POS and terminal services on top of that. So I don't know if I'm correctly answering that at all. Try to approach that from two different ways.
Okay. Okay, cool. Cool. Yes. Thank you, Dan. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it sounds like we covered all bases. And again, like there's lots of different moving pieces that comes into, collecting payment. But yeah, I think you handled that wonderfully. And it was a great transition to collecting payment online. So we'll go into that part next. So here are some of the advantages of being able to collect your payment online. You don't have the same level of customer face-to-face interaction, but on the flip side, you do provide a higher level of customer convenience in the fact that customers can make payments or buy products from you anywhere at any time, even when your shop's not open or you're closed for business for the weekend. This makes it really easy for customers to do business with you, which can actually help drive customer loyalty. Along with that, it can also help you generate increased revenue simply because customers can buy from you at any time and at any place. In a lot of cases, there is the option or the possibility of having faster processing, simply because online payments don't require manual processing or physical deposits of checks or depositing cash, which can lead to faster receipt of funds and improve your cash flow. Now, depending on the payment gateway you use, this can have greater security. Like what we were just talking about with encrypting your customer data. This can reduce the risks of fraud and chargebacks. And chargebacks are basically a consumer protection measure in which a consumer disputes a charge, and then the credit card company will actually basically reimburse the customer for that. And then finally, one of the bigger advantages, I think, to doing payment online is it allows you to get more granular data collection on your customers and their behaviors. You can turn around and use that to improve your services, improve your products, maybe change your products by identifying which ones sell the best at which different times. All this information can be really, really advantageous when you're looking to refine your business to improve it.
Okay, cool.
Okay, so let's talk about some tools you'll need to collect payment online. The first one we've kind of touched on a little bit is a payment gateway. And this is an online service that processes credit card or debit card payments securely. These include PayPal, Stripe, and Authorize.net. Those are some of the more common ones. You also need some sort of shopping cart software. And this is just a component of your e-commerce platform that allows customers to pick what they want and begin the payment process. If you were with us for our last webinar, we had a webinar about choosing the e-commerce platform that's right for you. And we mentioned that the shopping cart is really one of the most important aspects of that platform. It's the one that you really want to make sure it's going to work optimally to basically, improve your business. So examples of some shopping cart software include WooCommerce, Magneto, and Shopify. Shopify is probably one of the most well-known ones. You also want to look into what's called an SSL certificate. And this is a security certificate that encrypts data transmitted between a website and a customer's browser. And this is really essential to ensuring the security of online payments and to protect your customer data. So as you can tell, there's a recurring theme here. No matter how you collect payment, you want to make sure that it's always secure. You also want to have a payment processor. This is the financial institution that facilitates transactions between your website and your customer's bank. So basically make sure that the money gets transferred from the customer's account to you. Examples of payment processors include Braintree, Square, and BlueSnap. And these can work in conjunction with your payment gateways to complete transactions. If you're doing a lot of services, you'll need to look into some sort of invoicing software. This is just, make it easy for you to send invoices to customers for services rendered. And it's also important to have the software so you can create and send invoices to accept online payments as well. So some examples of this include QuickBooks, Xero with an X, so that's Xero, and FreshBooks. If you are doing a lot of e-commerce, you might also want to look into mobile optimization for your website, simply because more and more people are making purchases on their mobile devices. So you want to make sure that your website makes it easy for them to make those purchases while they're on the go. And as always, you want to invest in fraud prevention tools. Oops, excuse me. Let's go back one. Okay, simply because online payments are vulnerable to fraud. So you want to keep that in mind. Fraud prevention tools like address verification and card security codes will help reduce that risk of fraud. And we'll talk in just a minute about some ways that you can kind of just monitor your payments just to kind of, note anything that might be suspicious and identify potential indicators of fraud. But before we do that, we just want to take a moment to kind of step back and look at some of the examples of payment processors that we've kind of touched on so far. This is a fairly comprehensive list of payment processors that provide services both for in-person and online payment methods. Of course, we've talked about Square quite a bit. Another one is Stripe. That's a more common one as well. PayPal, of course, we've talked about. This one is probably really popular for nonprofits. I've seen a lot of nonprofits use PayPal to accept donations, as well as some lesser known ones, including Braintree, Payline, Adyen, I believe, and Clover. So when you get a copy of this PowerPoint deck later, you'll be able to click into the links on this page and go to the landing pages for each of these. Okay, so now we've gone over some of the tools. Let's talk about the best practices for collecting payment online. The first one is, if you can, make sure you offer multiple payment options, including major credit cards, PayPal, and other popular payment methods. And this is where knowing your clientele is really helpful. So if you know that most of your clients like to pay with Venmo or some other kind of digital wallet, you can find a system that will support that. You also, again, want to always protect your customer data using secure payment gateways, using that SSL certificate, and of course, always following best practices for online security to protect your customers' sensitive information. You also want your system to be simple and easy to use. It should be simple for people to pay you for the services or products that you offer. So this is where looking at all the different systems and looking for ones that are intuitive, that are user-friendly, is really important at this stage. Also make sure that you're providing very clear and transparent pricing. Like we mentioned before, make sure that your customers know before they begin the payment transaction process exactly how much they'll be paying for that particular service or product. So, again, include any fees, taxes, shipping costs, all of that should be readily visible to the customer. Always send payment confirmation and receipts with every transaction. And this will just verify the payment details and provide proof of payment, again, both for the customer and for you. As always, you want to follow up with late payments. This is a place where online payment processing can actually be quite helpful. You can set it up to where your system will send automatic payment reminders, encouraging your clients or customers to pay their outstanding bills promptly. And you always want to monitor for fraud. So in addition to using fraud detection tools, you want to monitor your transactions for any suspicious or unusual activity. So if you notice that you've had multiple failed payment attempts in a short period of time, like someone keeps trying to buy the same thing over and over and over again, and it keeps getting denied, that's a little suspect. Similarly, if you have a big ticket item that you only sell maybe 1 or 2 of in a quarter, and suddenly somebody's bought 10, that could be a sign too that there might be fraud involved. So just, again, keep a close eye on your transactions and just notice anything out of the ordinary. Always keep accurate records of all payments that you receive, and reconcile your payments regularly to ensure accurate accounting and accurate financial reporting. Okay, before we move on, are there any questions or thoughts?
Bridget, is there one software that you think does all of these aspects? So, sends the reminder email or the confirmation, some of the things that you said, make sure that you have this, this, and this, and there's software for that. Is there a software that does all of them?
I would say, and Dan, you can correct me on this, but I would say from what we've seen so far, the one that hits most of these boxes is Wix. That's primarily basically like an e-commerce platform, but it's got a lot of functionality built in there where, yeah, you can follow up on late payments. You can, keep a transaction record of all of your transactions. You can accept multiple kinds of payment. To me, that's one that stands out the most, is having most of these features.
I agree with that. I've been very surprised by Wix. We've actually been seeing it since they first released it onto the market, when it was kind of just a clunky drag and drop thing. And we've recently subscribed to it to move our own website. And it was a real pleasant surprise in a number of different dimensions, especially, like as far as them handling the payments. And their payment processor behind the scenes is Stripe. And so Stripe is also even taking care of monitoring for fraud, on the Visa network and stuff like that. And basically trying to catch various fraudsters without you ever having to pay too much attention to it, other than just watching your different notifications that come up as the site gets used. So yeah, I would agree that Wix is definitely coming a long way to hopefully checking all of these boxes, and wherever they're a little weak, they've been recently making improvements even in those places. So
yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you. It looks like we have a hand up also.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Maria, feel free to unmute your microphone if you'd like.
Excuse me. I want to go back to one slide before, and you pointed out a payment gateway, and you called it an online service, and you gave PayPal as an example. And then further down, you talked about a payment processor and described it as a financial institution like Braintree or Square. And can you just discuss the difference of what those are when you talk about a payment gateway and the payment processor? What's the difference?
Yeah, that's a great question. Dan, I think you might have a better beat on that than I do. Would you mind?
Yeah, that might have, we may have kind of made a little faux pas there in splitting those two things apart. There is a minor difference, but usually it's the payment processor that that provides you with the payment gateway type of service. So the payment gateway you could see as like the portal that you log into, or the function that you use, like a POS terminal function, or a card swiping function. And the payment processor, it would be more like the organization or the company that provides that.
And so in the case of Square, could it do both?
Yeah, especially in the online transactions where it's purely virtual transaction, like somebody comes to your online web store and they purchase something from your web store. The entire transaction is handled by Square, and the customer doesn't even really see that they're going into any kind of payment gateway or anything like that, even though that's what's happening. And then their deposit is collected from their debit card or credit card, and that money is transferred to your account, and everything is basically transparent. But yeah, like you're seeing an example right there of like Square is a lot of times the gateway and the processor.
And can that be true as well for point of sale? I'm the person who put in that we have a nonprofit used bookstore. So if the Friends of the Library decide to go with Square, it would function as a processor plus a gateway.
Yes, ma'am, that's right. Like if
Okay.
whenever you have any of the terminal devices or anything like that, as long as you have access to a decent, reliable network, they'll set up a, like an ad hoc secure connection for each transaction, and that information goes straight into their portal from your terminal device.
Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. Thank you, Maria. We appreciate it. Any other questions or thoughts before we hit into the last section of our session today? Okay, cool. So next, let's see. Let's look at some. We've been through this one. We've been through best practices. Okay. So for all the laudatory things we've mentioned about online payment, there is a lot of advantages to accepting payment online. But there are some instances where online payment is either not possible or it could be a little bit more difficult. We just want to cover those briefly. The first is if you're dealing in what are called high-risk transactions. And these are ones that typically either involve large sums of money or involve high-risk industries. And a high-risk industry is simply one that a bank has deemed as having a higher instance of either chargebacks or disputed payments. So I'm just going to skip ahead briefly to the last slide in the deck here. And we have a list of high-risk business categories. And as you can see, it's really varied. It's everything from house auctions to CBD products, to debt services and gift cards. It doesn't mean that these are necessarily bad industries, like this doesn't mean that these are bad industries at all. It just means that these are ones that banks have identified as having a higher risk of, disputed payment types. So if your business falls into one of these categories, it doesn't mean that you can't accept online payment. It just means that you might need to look around a little bit more and do some more research to find, basically find a provider that will give you a good deal, a fair shake, and, will handle those payments for you. So another instance when it could be harder to take online payment is if you're dealing in what are called restricted products or services. And these are usually limited to things like firearms or adult content. You might also consider that some of your customers have limited access to technology, which may hinder their ability to pay for things online, right? So maybe they don't have maybe they don't have a new cell phone that allows them to, get onto your website and easily navigate it. Maybe they have poor internet access. Of course, as we know in Wyoming, sometimes the internet infrastructure isn't as strong as it is in other parts of the country. So that's important to consider as well. Similarly, some of your customers may just not feel comfortable sharing their financial or other personal information online and may prefer to do business in person instead. So this is where knowing your customers and kind of knowing your clientele is really important to decide whether or not online payment, leaning into that really hard, is going to be a good choice for your business. You also want to consider if there are any compliance requirements in place that might make online payment difficult, if not impossible. And this is usually limited to very highly regulated industries such as healthcare or financial services. But again, just do your due diligence, do some research, and see if there are any compliance requirements that might make online payment a heavier lift for you. Okay. So now we're going to put it all together and give you some questions that you can ponder to help you identify which payment method is right for you. As we mentioned before, you want to start by considering what are your customers' payment preferences? What types of payments do they typically use where you do business with them? What transaction fees are you willing to pay? Remember that different payment processors can vary greatly in how much they charge for their services. So it's really important to consider the cost of each payment receipt method that you're considering. One moment, please. Excuse me. Okay. As we've mentioned multiple times, you always want to make sure that your payment method is secure. But you also want to consider what's most convenient for you and your customers. If you already have an e-commerce platform, consider which payment processors will integrate into that existing platform. So you want to make sure that it's going to play well with your shopping cart. You also want to see if it can maybe integrate into your accounting software, and that will help you streamline your accounting process and, basically just reduce the chance of, data entry error or things like that. Also consider if you do international transactions. If you do, then you'll want to find a payment processor that will allow you to not only accept payments from people outside the US, but also possibly accept multiple forms of currency. Also consider how long it takes to get payment from a processor. Some payment receipt methods can take several days to get the payment from, and of course, that's going to impact your cash flow. So you want to choose a payment receipt method with fast processing times to minimize that delay. Take a good look too for their chargeback policies. And again, this is primarily, if you're doing business online. Chargebacks are a consumer protection mechanism, as we've mentioned before, that refund customers on disputed transactions. Now, if you're on the receiving end of this as the vendor, a chargeback can be a very costly and time-consuming process. So you want to make sure that you look at your provider and, just make sure that their policies on chargebacks are very clear and fair. If you do any kind of service or product that requires a subscription, you want to make sure that your system allows for subscription-based payments. For instance, we know that Wix supports this as well. So if you do coaching, for instance, or you provide, say like a paid newsletter or something like that, Wix will allow you to set up a system where people can pay for that subscription automatically, and it comes automatically out of their account. And finally, you want to consider whether or not your system provides good customer support. And this is regardless of whether you're doing your business primarily online or in person. If something goes wrong, and as we know as business owners, it probably does quite frequently. You want to make sure that you have somebody you can rely on to give you good, fast answers to those questions. Okay, I know we've covered a lot of ground today, and we really appreciate you, coming here today and sharing your ideas and sharing your questions. So this last part, we just want to open up to any additional questions or thoughts you might have. Yeah, Daniel.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that, we have mentioned Wix a lot, coincidentally, in this particular session, and that Bridget and I are in no way associated with Wix, and we're not compensated by them, and we don't represent them in any way. That's just, basically our opinions about Wix. So I just wanted to cover that.
Yes, thank you for clarifying that. That's important. Okay, any other thoughts or questions?
Thank you, Bridget and Daniel. I think that that was really informative. You covered a lot of information today, and so thank you so much for that.
Of course.
Someone mentioned it can be complicated in the chat, and that's exactly right. It can be.
Yes, it's very true. That's very true. So yeah, I mean, take what we presented today. It's kind of like gum, chew it for what it's good, take the sweetness, and whatever doesn't work, you can leave behind. But always make sure to do your own always make sure to always do your own due diligence, to do your own research, and make sure that the one that you're picking is good for you and your business.
Perfect. So I would like to invite everyone to our next webinar. That's going to be Thursday, April 13th. At 11 a.m. as well, and we are going to be covering project management software at that time. Additionally, we also have a very short survey following the completion of this webinar, so please feel free to complete that as well. It really helps us to determine what kind of webinars and programming interests you and are most helpful for you and your small business. So please take the time to complete that. I hope everyone has a great Thursday afternoon. Hopefully it's warm wherever you're at, or getting warmer. Otherwise, thank you everyone for attending, and we will hopefully see you next month.